Thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. So my slides are a bit messy today, and it's mostly because I didn't know who I'm talking to. So you'll see slides that are not meant to be slides. They have a lot of data in them, and the reason for it, apart from me being lazy, is that I want to give you different perspectives. And if you see something that is kind of a question that you have for your institution, then come on and we can look over details when we go over those slides. So I'm going to talk about implementing OMERO class at NYU at the medical center. So we are slightly different. Sorry, put my timer on. We are kind of separated. The medical center is very separate from the rest of the NYU kind of schools. So like engineering, or what we call NYU downtown, where the Faculty of Biology is. We are very insular because we are a medical center, and everything is basically it's the clinic that drives all the money and all the research here. So we're kind of like shielded from everything. And I would say that the most important thing about us implementing OMERO at this, at NYU, was to have proper support from the correct people, meaning there had to be an institutional support, an IT support, and support from some area of research. And so this is why I think this is one of the most important slides. So I'll go over each one of these, and this is, we had MCIT support. MCIT stands for Marketing Center Information Technology. And so we had two main partners, I would say. Kren, who is underlined and is here somewhere in the back hiding. Say hi, Kren. And he's actually the one that did all the work of implementing it together with Blanco software. And there's Chris McLeod, who worked with Kren tightly on this, and do all the technical implementation and installation of OMERO. We have a sage at MCIT, John Wider, who is politically adept at getting the right people in the room and convincing like higher up stakeholders that this is an important thing, and he knows who to talk to. And he gave us all his support, although we were a tiny little, core, nobody's listening to us, and he pushed this up a lot. So those are our partners at MCIT. Of course, at Blanco, and I showed you Chris, we would not have done it out of like the open source OMERO. We couldn't have done it. We did not have the expertise for that. I'll go to the red, which is the Office of Science and Research. So I work in a core facility. I am not a core director, but we were in a core where we produce a lot of this data. And since my core director kind of understood that this was a priority, even though it was not the kind of like the real workflow that she's interested in, she gave me enough time to spend on this. So that's the other thing, you need your direct bosses to understand the importance of it, so that they're not going to freak out when you spend a lot of time on it. And of course, the Health Sciences Library. And now we've had a partnership of many years with them. And Nicole at the back also is a data librarian, and it's been extremely, it's really nice to have this interaction between all of them, very separate. So as I said, we are mostly a clinical institution, though we do have some very basic science labs. There's 200 plus labs. Our IT system at medical center is highly centralized, and there are other models in medical centers where research is kind of completely segregated from the rest of the clinical IT. That is not our model. We have kind of avenues where these things interact, and so security is very tight even with the research data. The core labs, which is also different from other institutions, are highly, they are very interactive. So we have a lot of different core labs, but we are all integrated. So we know what the other core lab does, and it's not a department that, that has set up their own core, an institutional system. And I think that works very well. Okay, so how did we get OMERO in through the back door? XPath. Well, so XPath is a core I work in. We're in experimental pathology. Some would call it a histopathology course. We do a lot of sample processing, staining. We slide scan, and we do spatial profiling. We have a lot of technologies. We do not have people coming to our core, renting our instruments and doing their own imaging. We do everything for them. And so our way of delivering data is some kind of image viewer system, because it's usually whole slide scans. And we used to use bright field only. This was even before we started acquiring a lot of multispectral data and a lot of more complex data types. And we used to use the Leica system, but Leica told us that their slide path system was end of life. They told us this in July, and the end of life had occurred in June. And so we're like scrambling to figure out what are we gonna move to. We're like, let's do OMERO. And Cindy was great because she said, okay. And I was like, no, we need OMERO because we can do all of these other images. And at that point, we were integrating a lot of fluorescent microscopy to these. And so we kind of got in OMERO that way. So it was easy to convince Cindy about it. And then we needed to convince, and these are the next few slides, are convincing the institution, NIT, that this is great. Right? That this is the one that we need, that we don't need a different one. And these are kind of slides that we use to say, oh, we have this problem, it's institutional, and we have, basic researchers, and then we have the clinical researchers, and this is going to kind of make it smooth for both populations to use, right? Because the clinical researchers, they don't go and open ImageJ. They don't download ImageJ. They're working from a desktop computer anywhere in the, who knows what, and they can't be installing image analysis software for this, and they just want to see their slides, be them EHA, fluorescence, etc. So with that, and with more like saying data ownership and like trying to explain these concepts, we got, the go forward. And this is our architecture. I was talking to Kren, and I was saying, some of our scopes integrate to our storage, basically, our Isilon storage. This instrument, like the data flow from the instrument to the storage location into these folders, is not automated. We do it manually because we know who we're producing data for. We can't automate that. So we will plug that in, and then we'll run some scripts to import the data to the OMERO database. We have very strong firewalls at NYU. So if somebody's connecting from their home, they have to use our VPN to go in and see it on the web. We'll talk later about our public deployment. If you have questions about this, which I don't understand, Bren is, and you can talk about the ports and the whatever. Okay, so how do people access the data that we do currently? So, of course, through the web client. Initially, we started kind of like telling people you can access it with OMERO Insight and ImageJ. Then we realized we could, especially because we produce a lot of whole slide imaging, we were veering towards QPath, saying like, if you know ImageJ, you can do it with QPath. And then just a note that we never got the QPath extension to work with our OMERO, but this other extension from Bio works great. So this is what I tell them to use. And of course, ImageJ, and eventually now we have some kind of people who are actually doing development and AI models, and they're connecting through our cluster, and they're moving labels back into OMERO. So we have core labs that produce, they put the data in place imports, and then they can see the data. And if it's an external lab that our core works with, so if somebody at Rockefeller does an experiment with us, we will still place that data in OMERO. We can give them access and make a group for them, or we can just, say we're gonna put the data in this OMERO folder, but you have access through Globus and you don't have to go through the web client. This is kind of one of these slides that I said, if you're interested, come talk to me. This is how we do onboarding, and it's kind of complicated, and it's still, work in progress, but there's various steps. And just to make sure that everybody, fits into all the permissions and categories. We have the same one for externals, because those are also tricky to work with. I would say that till now, we have registered 233 groups with 900 users. The logins are now stabilized. So these, I'm showing just total logins to a month, and these are the logins per group. So we have, as I said, like 230 groups, but actually the groups that are constantly logging, like our status is about 109 are logging in more than 5 times per month. So I would say that that's our steady state, 109 groups, which is what we're showing. 109 labs with more than 5 logins per month. Images, of course, these are in an OME sense, so it's counting thumbnails and such, but we kind of have, a steady flow of images. Now we know what we do kind of yearly. And what I will say, though, is that I don't have it in a slide here. This is more image data. Oh, here's the public. So let me just talk about the images that we import. So when you look at the storage, we have 380 terabytes of storage assigned to our OMERO deployment. Of those, 300 have been produced by XPath. So it's full of 300 terabytes of our data. There's 40 that are coming from individual labs, meaning the data source is a highly structured core that delivers highly structured data. The data that's coming from the labs is minimal. And I say that because even though it's 40 terabytes, I know that these labs are using, 15 gigabyte images, right? And so there are not so many images and there are not so many labs doing it. My take home message is that, it's data production and kind of centralized data production that has driven the use of OMERO at our institution. It's not people uploading, for as much as I try to push that way. Okay, so we have a public UI. It's the same server, but you can see data publicly. These again, where the slides that we used to convince IT that it was important to have public, even though the medical center were freaking out about it seriously. So we had several slides. Nicole helped with the wording. We went a year over with the IT security to explain why it was important and that it's great. And we even had a financial repercussions statement at the end, and that always helps. So now we have OMERO linked with the data catalog, and here Nicole is the lead at the data catalog where they put up data sets. And so now we've linked OMERO to the data catalog so it can be findable outside of NYU. So that's great. We do have increasing logins. So the box plot shows the logins in red are from this latest year, so we're accessing, and I kind of feel bad because we only have one data set probably shared properly and cataloged. There we have some other stuff that we've put in the public, but it's only one. And people still log in. So I'm hoping that we can, you know, convince our researchers now that it's like a few years into the data sharing mandate that this is an easy way to share their data. I'm stopping now. This is the last thing. Our challenges are the coming data types. These are the kinds of data that XPath is producing now and how to deal with them and how to link either the genomics to something outside of OMERO and create these links would be, you know, that's our wish list. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. There any questions? Otherwise, we can keep further. Yeah.
Just one more comment. I think when you said your onboarding slide, you said it's specific, but I believe what the diagram stop-start branches will be great value if you could put that somewhere in our document.
You need to be loud,
Because everybody is having the same problem.
Okay, yeah.
If that is possible, because obviously there will be probably adjustment with expertise from other groups, but it will be wonderful. That's a great start to put because yeah, people ask the same question, what do I do if I hit that move? Well, there's a door at that corner, so you can go there. And Tom has a lot of also information.
Yeah, I don't have to work the diagram, but some way I can.
So that would be great if we could start working on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, then we'll have Michelle present about her work at UNC using OMERO.
Thank you all. Apologies to some of you who have heard this already, so please bear with me. Hopefully there's a bit of background for those who I haven't met yet or talked OMERO with. But what I wanted to start with is that I am a core director at UNC Chapel Hill, and we are a training-based, user-based core. So we have people come in, we do consultations, we train them how to use the microscope, and then most of the time they're collecting data is when we are not present with them. So we are slightly different than Valeria's instance, and I want to tell you about how we went through getting OMERO at then UNC. All right, so this started with one of our main users having a grant called Brady. So I am in the Neuroscience Center, and one of our users had a pilot project with multiple core facilities, including 2 different light microscopy facilities, because we are departmental still at UNC for our core infrastructure, and a small animal MRI. And then multiple different PIs and cyber infrastructure specialists, including the Renaissance Computing Institute, or RENCI, which had been referenced previously. And what they were interested in is counting every single nuclei in a mouse brain, that's multiple tens to hundreds of mouse brains, and looking at how microcephaly develops in dead students of embryonic brains. So we wanted every single depth and nuclei present. So what they started was a interaction with iRods, which is housed at UNC, but as Katerina had mentioned, operates in a consortium-based model. And what they were saying is that instead of going from our local microscope to a local compute cluster, we could do a federated model. right? And most people wanted at the time was to put everything in the cloud. With these giant data sets, we didn't have the compute to support that, and we're worried that the data would get stuck there. And so we thought of a more distributed model where we would have multiple iRODS instances enabling different proprietary or compute use nodes, and that this could then be accessed across different areas. So the idea here was that we could get data in using iRODS, and this would then alert people to having different resources, different permissions, and different apps. And in this case, think of OMERO as an on the iROD side. Apparently I'm very strong with my keys. And on the other side, people could use it for metadata searching and could execute more functions on it without actually locally downloading it in an extra step. Now, this was a short-term grant, but enabled us to start things like bringing in Katerina early in, where we sat and she told us about OMERO and said that this may be a way to help be essentially an app, as iRODS was thinking about it, for storing data and visualizing it. So as we went along, we implemented 2 different nodes. And one of these was in our core, where we had a Linux machine that ran iRODS as well as other Linux functions, and allowed people to import data into this iRODS federated system. Then we had an iRODS node at School of Med IT, which connected to our high compute cluster and enabled them to send jobs from there without a separate user-based interaction. And we had a final one, which was really for storage. And this allowed us to have a bit of a sandbox because we didn't have the space at either of those other 2 nodes to store much data. So as we were doing this project, we decided to take a 2-pronged approach. One was a sandbox that that IT called, where I was allowed to play with open source OMERO on an extra computer that they had lying around because they thought this was an interesting project. And that one I could break and I could try different things and see what we really thought the main use case would be. And then we had a different one that was housed at School of Med. That was our official pilot project. And for that, I was really controlling access. I really only wanted data sets of a certain size and wanted to develop an array of data that I could control. The input and ingest to, that people weren't going to start running jobs that would break our compute very quickly. And to demonstrate to IT that we did have some engaged user base that wasn't going to break things as soon as we put it on a bigger structure. So that sandbox, again, I'm not going to go into this, but allowed us to try different things and figure out that things like the Cell Profiler add-on would be very beneficial for us, especially because in the graduate courses that I teach, it was a way to onboard people and teach them the benefit when they were just getting introduced to image analysis. But we didn't have a current integration to the high compute cluster that didn't require user interface. However, IT liked that because it could be charged directly to the PI and went through them. And so I was also okay with that, as I didn't want to enter into the area of owning data. And so this did keep it separate, although wasn't maybe our ideal implementation. Our pre-production server used UNC login, had a compute node and a visualization node, but it was pretty limited. And so I had to promise them that I wasn't going to break it, that we weren't using it for light sheet yet, but that I could use it as a test bed because I could tell them immediately once I open this door, we have these users who have this amount of data, but I won't let them break the system yet. We did get Cell Profiler and Path Viewer add-ons, and that was important for us because we did have a lot of whole slide imaging, and that was generally bigger than most users could view on their own desktops. So again, I very tightly controlled the number of active users in our pre-production server and the type of data that we were allowed to do. So we had a few trial data showing that we could import behavioral data, other videos, MRI, but we did not currently have core ingest from those yet. And that convinced, after a few years, IT, that we had a system that could be developed longer term, and eventually led to our OMERO Plus integration, which happened multiple years later in 2022, after there was the called the big sale on OMERO Plus at the end of that year. And UNC is, I would say, a risk-averse institution. Some of you might be familiar with that. And so the idea that they were going to miss out on a big sale financially was actually a prime motivating factor. So we were able to get that in right at the end of 2022. And that was generated from internal funds and the funds that we had already placed. And so that was shared by the School of Medicine, cancer centers, multiple departments, and the School of Medicine ITS. I will note that I got multiple emails saying that I was double dipping. I was arguing the same users to multiple different groups. But again, the fact that the NIH was pushing this and we were looking for a school possible system was helped. And in the end, the purchase went through ITS, our IT services, and was housed there, although I was officially the PI on the purchase. Now we have multiple hundreds of users, multiple cores starting to use this to onboard people, and about 10 terabytes in data. We have promised up to 100, but they will only add it as we get to a certain portion of space. And that I grew to like, because that took a few instances to develop as well, where we had to copy and redo the system a few times. So now we know we have a growable base without losing information. Our main eager adopters were early PIs who had a lot of turnover in their labs, and they really liked having permanent access, early access to that data, and they started using OMERO Figure as well, and they saw it as a good way to onboard early people to their labs. Technicians and students also really liked it, and some eager early students then brought it to their labs. But what we found really worked was incorporating it during my first consultation with people when I'm talking about responsibilities and policies and data management. And I tell them, I have them log in, this is what you'll have access to. We'll show you this after your first training session. You're not required to use it, but it is now available to you as a second option for whatever you were already planning to do your data storage in. And we've seen that grow quite a bit, especially for the people who were not going to be downloading something like BG or ImageJ. I was going to talk very briefly about iRODS and OMERO, but I think the other thing that's important to note on that more production server side is that relationships are really important at UNC, and having people in the same room that were both investigators, in our case, our data management centers and IT was key, but also having an alumni or alumnus of UNC integrated into Glencoe certainly helped alleviate some of the nervousness that UNC would have had otherwise. And so I don't know about your institution, but UNC is one that takes a bit of time, a little bit of not breaking things to grow, and knowing that others have done this in the past successfully was useful for me. We're still working on iRODS and OMERO integration, and I just wanted to throw this out there since this had been discussed early. So iRODS, we're thinking, could help provide the policy that OMERO does not natively have. So this could provide our local namespaces and metadata catalogs, and allow us to do things like, in order to be saved permanently on UNC's file space, you must have this information attached to your data. And so that IT is interested in working with us with, and iRODS is, because then we have a larger user base for them. After a lot of conversations between Josh and Terrell, who is the current iRODS, I don't know if it's CEO or lead, is that a tight integration would require a lot of time and knowledge, and we didn't have current people to put on that project, but a loose integration could be much faster. And in this case, we're thinking of things as apps that each other run. So there is a current working group. It's been up for an embarrassing number of years and hosted up on Terrell's GitHub. And you can check different notes that when this meets, and if anybody wants to try some things, there's a lot of notes there, and many of you have joined at various points these meetings. But the goal is to eventually be able to integrate both as an API of each other and determine which works best for whichever institution you happen to be at. So I just wanted to throw this up there as things that I would love to discuss more with you all. I know some of you have talked your ear off already. I'm really trying to get a public-facing OMERO linked to UNC's system like Valeria has. We don't have that yet, and what they really want to do is launch it as an app. So it won't have all of OMERO's data saving features or download, but it would allow visualization and then for you to query and say, I want to download this data set. And then that would be handled separately with different permissions. We'd love to have more of an automated ingest. I think that has slowed some of our implementation to the production server. For example, taking the stitched file only and removing the raw files to longer term storage, just cleaning things up. And we don't have a beautiful naming structure like was shown by Judith. And so it can be quite random, and that will lead to different amounts of functionality. We'd love to implement different QC indicators. As I was talking with people at breakfast, we are very reward motivated. And so our students would love a green to yellow to red, although red might be a little aggressive, indicator, right, of data quality. And our PIs would love that, right? Which data set should I start to work my analysis on? Which is representative versus best? And is there a way that I can quickly monitor if the data we're inputting is likely to be useful? And then we have a light sheet pathway, and we're very interested in that. And so I just wanted to throw this up there. This is what we've been spending a lot of time working on. We have a dual illumination light sheet system, which I thought would be a really fun pet project. And has allowed us to keep coming to IT with different challenges where we eventually have data sets that are multiple terabytes in size and need a multiple terabyte or tens of terabytes sandbox for production and analysis. And we think that iRods and OMERO together could help us manage this much, much better. That's it, except for all of my thanks to all of you, and of course, everybody who helps support the course.
Michelle, any questions? Jason?
This is a question for both Michelle and Valeria, but both of you have talked about a very long journey, several years, it sounds like, both cases. Is it just a slow progression, or you guys make, it sounds like it's being led by, your teams. Are there specific points where something happened and now, okay, we actually think this project is going forward, or is it just dogged persistence over several years working through the realities of two different organizations?
I think for me, an external deadline for funding helped.
Sure.
I don't think they would have been motivated to purchase, except for the idea that it would be more expensive later, honestly. And I think having the NIH actually decline to review some grants, we needed that to happen. The risk of it with a data management plan that wasn't supported wasn't enough to motivate people. But when people started getting comments back that their data management plan was insufficient, there was added interest as well.
So I have questions regarding, so if you have a multiple source of data, for example, confocal or whatever, so on their machine, they first store on their local computer, then they upload it to your Linux machine. You have like a central storage for all OMEROs to import, right?
So we use OMERO Insight, to use that, and that is a downloadable, so it can be on any computer. So I have it on all of my acquisition computers,
Okay.
but also people can do it from their individual labs. I just control how much data they can input at a certain time.
So just everybody just use Insight to upload to your Linux. Your Linux have like a OMERO managed store, so to get all the data in. So basically copy the data from Insight into that. So then OMERO centrally manage all the data. Okay.
We have a very different system.
Yeah.
We have in place import, so we have centralized storage for everybody. And the permissions to each one of these folders are granted by Active Directory, so that it's an MCIT thing.
So the storage is is the Windows like a server, or is it running on the Linux? So what kind of?
It's an Isilon data cluster.
Okay, so then you basically export as a SMB share for the Windows machine to upload? Or okay,
Yeah, and then we export as an NFS for the application server to mount.
okay, so you're allowed to multiple
Yeah.
lines to upload to the central store.
So you can do SMB and NFS on it.
Okay,
So the permission system is a little complicated, I would say very complicated, but this has been our major kind of, I think we got, just to go back to Jason's question, we got OMERO all at once and migrated all our labs that already had slide path access. And so that was great because they were just forced to be integrated and registered, and that was great. But now getting people onto OMERO and start to upload their own stuff is a much, and just for disclosure, our microscopy core has still not bought into this. And they refuse, but now because of the storage concerns and charging and whatever, they will just have to. So at least we have it ready to go.
so if you export as an NFS, that's a permission system is like a kind of a massive if you want to reconcile with the SMB shares, right? So that's the Windows side of the permission. So if you export an NFS, it's a like Linux side permission. That's kind of like how you gonna reconcile this?
So our Isilon storage currently can handle both. And it
Okay.
basically, I believe it just duplicates one to the other. But the data is synced almost instantly, so you can see it on both ends, SMB and NFS. But it's a feature of our data cluster, really. It's our IBM vendor Isilon. That we can use NFS and SMB, and there's no permissions conflicts or anything.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? This was great.